It started like any other night on the show. Laughter, applause, and that familiar polished energy that made late-night interviews feel like a safe, predictable ride. But this time, the moment Kid Rock stepped onto the stage, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. From the way he glanced toward the host's desk to the way he planted himself in the chair, it was clear he wasn't there for jokes. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his sarcastic charm and biting wit, thought it would be business, as usual. He was wrong. The audience, sensing a clash of worlds, grew unusually quiet as the interview began. Kid Rock didn't smile at the opening banter. He didn't laugh when Jimmy playfully poked at his latest tour. Instead, he leaned forward, his posture stiff, eyes locked with an intensity that even the cameras struggled to ignore. What began? As teasing quickly crossed a line when Jimmy made a pointed comment about Kid Rock's outspoken political views, tossing it into the conversation like it was harmless. It wasn't. Kid Rock didn't need to raise his voice. His expression said it all. He fired back with an icy calm that cut through the air. He called out the host for being a puppet of corporate elites and accused him of mocking working class Americans from the comfort of his Hollywood bubble. The mood in the room dropped several degrees. Jimmy, unwilling to be upstaged on his own show, responded with even more edge. He didn't just double down, he twisted the knife, bringing up past controversies, questioning Kid Rock's character, and hinting at hypocrisy. Each word lit a fuse. The studio audience, once chuckling, now sat wide-eyed. The usual safety of the stage was gone. This was no longer a talk show. It had turned into a showdown. Kid Rock, clenching his fists subtly beneath the desk, didn't flinch. He called the moment exactly what it was: a planned ambush dressed up as entertainment. Jimmy, not one to back down, scoffed, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. He was rattled and for the first time visibly unsure. Kid Rock shifted in his seat, voice sharp and unfiltered. He laid into the host, questioning his morals, mocking the performative compassion that oozed from every show segment. He accused Jimmy of pushing narratives that only served to divide and belittle anyone who didn't fall in line with his worldview. Jimmy fired back, but the control he usually wielded so effortlessly was slipping. His smile was gone. His tone was no longer comedic. This was personal now. Off-stage producers whispered urgently into headsets, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the moment burn. But neither man paused. Kid Rock stood firm, throwing each verbal punch with precision, while Jimmy clung to his reputation, trying to maintain composure as the ground shifted beneath him. It was the kind of moment that couldn't be undone. The cameras kept rolling, the audience kept watching, and the stakes kept climbing. What started as tension had now ignited into something raw and combustible. There was a weight in the air, a sense that whatever happened next would be remembered for years. Jimmy's face flushed with the heat of confrontation, and Kid Rock's gaze remained locked, unwavering, as if daring him to take it further. And Jimmy did. The moment Jimmy decided to escalate, the temperature in the room soared. With a forced laugh and a glance toward the audience, he shifted his tone from smug to scathing. No longer hiding behind jokes, he launched into a monologue laced with criticism, painting Kid Rock as a washed-up rebel clinging to relevance through outrage. It was meant to be a knockout blow, a final jab to humiliate his guest. But what followed silenced even the most vocal fans in the room. Kid Rock didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned back in his chair, letting Jimmy's words fill the space like smoke before a storm. The insult didn't sting. It sparked, and when he finally spoke again, it wasn't defensive. It was calculated. He picked apart Jimmy's character in front of everyone, laying bare the facade of the late-night comedian. He accused him of moral posturing, of using serious topics as props for cheap applause. He mocked the very foundation of Jimmy's show, calling it hollow, performative, and cowardly. Jimmy sat frozen for a moment, his smirk cracked wide open. The room that once buzzed with laughter now simmered in silence, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears. Then Jimmy stood up. This was no longer about ratings or entertainment. The cameras were still rolling, but they were no longer in control. The man who once held a nation's attention with his comedic timing was now visibly furious, raising his voice, stepping toward the edge of his desk, abandoning every ounce of restraint. He called out Kid Rock's failures, his past scandals, and even dragged in his personal life, aiming below the belt with surgical cruelty. It was no longer satire. It was a personal vendetta playing out live. Kid Rock rose from his seat too, his jaw tight, voice thunderous now. No longer calm, he called Jimmy out for being exactly what he hated. Just another privileged entertainer using real people's struggles as punchlines. He challenged the host to say something real for once, something that wasn't written for him. The confrontation wasn't just words anymore. It was two worlds colliding, blue-collar grit against polished elitism, raw experience against scripted comfort. The crew was no longer pretending to be calm. Stage managers paced just off-screen. The band had stopped playing. The air was thick with unpredictability, and even the audience seemed unsure whether they were still supposed to clap, laugh, or just stay silent. Some pulled out phones, filming what would soon explode across every platform online. What they were witnessing was not just a meltdown. It was a reckoning. As the shouting intensified, the lines between host and guest blurred. Jimmy Kimmel, the face of late-night composure, was now pacing and spewing accusations without the safety net of a teleprompter. Kid Rock, eyes narrowed, stood steady, hurling truths that had gone unspoken for too long. He exposed hypocrisy not just in Jimmy but in the entire industry, how voices like his were mocked and dismissed for entertainment, how any form of dissent was edited out or spun for ratings. The tension reached a tipping point when Kid Rock made it personal in a way that was impossible to recover from. He didn't just confront Jimmy, he embarrassed him. He reminded the audience of a scandal from Jimmy's past, one that had been buried and forgotten by most, but not by all. He spoke of it bluntly, without restraint, and in doing so, flipped the power dynamic completely. The crowd gasped. Jimmy's eyes darted, his chest heaving, his face now a mask of both anger and disbelief. For the first time in the night, Jimmy had no comeback. The control room panicked. The signal cut for a moment. Brief static filled millions of screens. But the damage was done. What was meant to be another celebrity segment had turned into an all-out public unraveling. There was no walking this back, no editing it into something palatable. Kid Rock had shattered the illusion, and Jimmy had helped him do it. As the cameras came back from that momentary blackout, they revealed a scene no one could have scripted. Jimmy Kimmel, usually the master of timing and tension, stood disarmed behind his desk, eyes searching the crowd for support that wasn't there. The laughter was gone, the smirks erased. All that remained was the weight of truth, still echoing in the studio from Kid Rock's final words. For the first time in years, the host of one of America's most watched shows was being forced to reckon with himself, live, raw, and unrehearsed. Kid Rock didn't sit back down. He stood tall in front of the desk, arms crossed, eyes locked on Jimmy with the same unflinching energy he had carried in. His presence didn't just command the room, it conquered it. Jimmy tried to regroup, to pivot back to control, but every word now came off as hollow. The charm he had once wielded like a weapon had turned against him. He attempted to dismiss the moment as a difference of opinion, a weak attempt to downplay the verbal demolition that had just taken place, but no one was buying it. Behind the scenes, executives were shouting into earpieces, desperate to salvage what little of the segment they could. But it was already too late. The cameras had captured it all. The truth had been televised. A guest had come into Jimmy's house and stripped him of his armor in front of millions. And the only thing more devastating than the confrontation itself was the reaction from the crowd. People weren't outraged. They were intrigued. Some even clapped. Not for Jimmy, but for the man who had dared to confront him on his own stage. Jimmy, now visibly sweating, tried one last time to assert dominance. He cracked a joke, his signature move to diffuse tension. But this time it fell flat. The audience didn't laugh. Instead they watched, almost grimly, as a man known for controlling every second of airtime slowly unraveled. Kid Rock didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than anything he had said. It was a reminder that sometimes you don't need to shout to win. You just need to stand your ground while the other side collapses. The producers scrambled to end the segment early, cutting to commercial abruptly, but not before the camera caught a final shot of Jimmy slumping into his chair, mouth tight, face pale. Kid Rock remained standing as the lights dimmed, still in control of the moment, unshaken. The credits rolled, but the damage was permanent. Viewers across the country weren't seeing a musician and a comedian arguing. They were witnessing something much deeper, an unfiltered clash between authenticity and performance, between those who speak from conviction and those who hide behind applause. Backstage, the mood was chaos. Jimmy stormed into his dressing room without acknowledging anyone. Doors slammed. Assistants panicked. Publicists scrambled to prepare statements before the footage exploded online. Kid Rock, on the other hand, walked calmly through the hallway, surrounded by silence. No outbursts, no celebration. Just a quiet confidence that he had said what needed to be said. He left the building without giving interviews, without shaking hands. He didn't need to explain himself. The message had landed, and it was louder than anything a press release could deliver. Online, the world erupted. Clips of the confrontation flooded social media. Opinions clashed. Some labeled it a career-ending disaster for Jimmy. Others hailed it as the most honest thing ever aired on late-night television. Commentators, celebrities, and political pundits all rushed to weigh in. Memes followed, hashtags trended. But beneath the noise was a growing sentiment that no one could ignore. People were tired of scripted outrage, tired of fake apologies, and rehearsed empathy. What they saw that night was flawed, messy, and real. And for once, that was enough. As headlines rolled out, and the media scrambled to spin the story in every direction possible, one fact remained clear. Jimmy Kimmel had been challenged on his own turf and had lost. Not because he was unprepared, but because he underestimated the force of someone who didn't care about approval. Kid Rock hadn't come for applause. He came for honesty. And when the dust settled, it was that honesty that remained standing. In the days that followed, the aftershocks rippled far beyond the studio walls. Late-night television, once a fortress of carefully measured opinions and crowd-pleasing applause, found itself under a microscope. Every outlet rushed to cover what had happened between Jimmy Kimmel and Kid Rock, yet none could agree on how to frame it. Was it a meltdown, a cultural moment, or a breaking point? Regardless of the angle, one truth emerged louder than the noise. Something irreversible had shifted. Jimmy remained mostly silent in public. His team released a cold, vague statement about spirited debate and differing perspectives, but it rang hollow in the wake of what millions had witnessed. Behind the scenes, tension brewed. Network executives met behind closed doors, weighing the cost of what had aired. Sponsors, once loyal, began to grow skittish. Writers scrambled to soften Jimmy's tone in future episodes, urging a return to safe, controlled humor. But nothing felt safe anymore. Meanwhile, Kid Rock's silence became its own statement. He refused interviews, turned down podcast invitations, and ignored the avalanche of requests from news outlets eager to get a follow-up. He let the footage speak for itself. He didn't need to explain what had happened. People already knew. They had seen a man walk into the heart of media's polished machine and pull back the curtain. And in doing so, he had reignited a conversation about honesty, about class, about who really gets to speak in America, and who gets silenced. Support poured in from unexpected corners. Working-class viewers, veterans, musicians, even rival entertainers began voicing their respect. Not everyone agreed with Kid Rock's politics, but they recognized courage when they saw it. He had stood in a room designed to ridicule him and never wavered. That kind of backbone couldn't be scripted. It was raw, it was real, and it exposed how deeply performative the rest of it had become. Jimmy, once untouchable, now appeared rattled in every subsequent episode. His jokes landed softer, his tone more cautious. The bravado that once defined his style had faded into something more defensive. Though he never addressed the confrontation directly again, the shadow of it hovered over every monologue, every guest interaction. He wasn't just dealing with the fallout of a bad interview. He was dealing with the realization that he had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. And what the world saw wasn't flattering. As the weeks rolled on, Kid Rock resumed. His tour schedule performing to packed venues filled with fans who felt they had witnessed a cultural vindication. He didn't boast about what had happened. He didn't have to. It became part of his legacy, not because of what he said, but because of what he refused to let slide. In an age of watered-down debates and cowardly compromises, he had brought fire into the room and left with his dignity intact. The confrontation had not been about winning an argument. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that thrived on scripted outrage, but collapsed under genuine resistance. It reminded viewers that sometimes strength doesn't come from clever retorts or rehearsed applause lines. Sometimes it comes from standing tall, saying what you believe, and letting the silence afterward speak volumes. In the end, Jimmy Kimmel didn't lose because he was challenged. He lost because he forgot how it feels to be on the receiving end of the arrogance he had grown so comfortable dishing out. Kid Rock didn't walk away with just applause. He walked away with clarity, with impact, and with something far more powerful than fame: respect. And as the lights dimmed on a shaken, late-night world, one truth remained clear. When authenticity walks into the room, no amount of laughter can drown it out.